Hi everyone. I'm Pastor Andrew, one of the pastors here at Christ Church.
And I'm Amy Epperman, the care director here on staff. We're so excited to bring you these amazing conversations that we've had the privilege to have with Christian mental health professionals, talking about mental and emotional health, how it intersects with our faith, and why it's important in our lives.
Even though mental health is an aspect of our overall health, as humans historically, mental health and mental wellness has not always been talked about in a healthy and constructive way in a church environment. Sadly, some people have been hurt by these damaging and unhelpful messages. Our goal with these conversations then is to provide a safe space to learn, de-stigmatize, and bring awareness to this important aspect of our health, all with a God-honoring Christian paradigm. We see quickly when we do this that therapy and theology do go hand in hand.
We hope that this is as helpful and life-giving for you as it has been for us.
Hi, Christ Church. So I have the privilege of sitting today with Heidi to talk more and more about mental health and the significant role that it plays in our lives. And she comes from a professional mental health backdrop as well. And so I'll allow her to introduce herself to you all. Heidi, could you tell us just who you are, a little bit about your backdrop, and your speciality as it relates to mental health?
Absolutely. I'm Heidi Wheeler, officially Dr. Heidi Wheeler in the academic arena.
Yes.
Gotta say it, I worked for it.
Absolutely.
But I teach nursing at MSOE School of Nursing, and my areas of expertise and content interests are supportive care and mental health. I do a lot of other things too, but that's where I keep going back to. Trauma-informed care and therapeutic communication. How do we talk to people well? How do we heal people in the world?
Yeah, so your backdrop is even the acknowledgement of bringing together and seeing the medicinal care, and just medical care is far more than a specific niche biological piece, but to note how our biological, physiological, mental, emotional, all those pieces tie together towards healing and restoration.
And
fair to say?
spiritual, yeah.
Ooh, yeah, girl.
I actually brought that into our program. Is just if it's not a religious school, it's not a faith-based school, it's an academic engineering school, but I wanted to make sure our students understood that people are mind, body, and spirit.
Well said.
And it doesn't matter if you're religious or not. There's a deep need and a deep place inside of every human being that's a spiritual side. And so to bring that to non-Christian students is very cool.
Yes.
I actually did a video just like this with a rabbi friend of mine.
Fabulous.
And we talked about spirituality, and he sits with people in the ICU and in life and death situations like you probably have before. But our class is really trying to call people to that concept of holistic care of a patient. And a lot of times we're really focused on the physiological care. What are the vital signs doing? What meds do they need? But in the hospital and beyond, people really want to be healed in their soul. Like that's what nursing is about, is like what is the patient's response to their illness, even more than what's going on physiologically. I mean, we're very good at that now in nursing. We're critical thinkers, we give meds, we do hard things, but we also treat the patient holistically.
Yeah, I so appreciate the thoughtfulness. I mean, you provide the unique perspective in so much as you do have a faith. You're grounded in your faith, your faith identity and who you are. And so you bring that alongside of you into your vocational calling of nursing, right? And so that might feel uncomfortable to some persons to even acknowledge like the complexity of the human anatomy and how we are. There's a mind, there's a body, there's a spirit, and these things are all interrelated and interconnected. When one is out of whack, it tends to impact the other two.
Absolutely.
Is that fair to say?
Oh, for sure.
And you've seen that, you've experienced that in engaging with people and working, for example, on their bodies. You know that you also have to be attentive to their spirits and their minds as well. Fair to say?
They're all connected. We talk a lot about the impact of trauma and how we read a book in one of my classes called The Body Keeps the Score.
Ooh, say more.
Your wife would like this book. If she's probably read it. A lot of mental health professionals have.
Yeah, it's widely used.
But if we don't deal with our trauma, whether it's as a child or something that happens later in life, it will show up in your body because you have an increase in cortisol. You have you have neural pathways that are set that make you have a sense of fear in times where there isn't anything dangerous actually happening. So there's a lot of people that haven't done the healing work with their trauma that are now suffering the impact of that in their bodies. Kids who've been neglected or abused in childhood, tend to have more chronic illnesses later in life. And so we talk about that. That's a whole study done in the 90s with Kaiser Healthcare. It's called the ACEs study. And they kind of figured that out at that point. And so now we're getting more and more research that shows care of the whole person is really what we have to do. We have people come in with an illness and we can't figure out physiologically what the problem is. And then I look in those eyes and I look at the way that person's carrying themselves and I want to say, what happened to you? What was your trauma? You know, like I know you're carrying something and we're not addressing that with you.
Oof.
So it's hard to be in the medical space and when we don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't help but remember, for example, the reality of what we carry within us, the markers, the scars of pain and suffering that have been done unto us or that we've experienced in some ways. I'm reminded of Jesus. I'm thinking of the resurrection, like post-resurrection. Jesus, comes to his disciples and he still bears within his body the reality, the scars, the markers of how he carried pain and suffering in his body. And that, now, a little bit different nuance there because we're talking about a resurrected Jesus who's got full healing and restoration. And yet, I guess what I'm pointing out is I appreciate when you're saying we can carry trauma in our bodies. We can carry our emotions and our experiences in our body. And I think you see that in Jesus in that he carries the cross in his body with his hands. I'm thinking specifically of like, show me the scars of my hands and my feet when he's talking to his disciples. And so, yeah, like our bodies can actually carry the pain, the suffering, the spirit, as well as the emotional impact of experiences. And sometimes it just like erupts out of us, right?
It does, and it comes in ways that we're not expecting at times.
Yeah.
But this is what I love about Christ incarnate, the incarnate God. He suffered as a human, so he can be with us in our suffering, because he understands.
Yeah.
He knows, like, being in the world and the darkness of sinful relationships and pain in his body. He's been there, and so he can relate to us.
Yes. There's the reality of how deep God enters into human experience, that he himself knows what it is to carry trauma in his own body, in his own soul and person. And he knows what that's like in the same way that we do.
Don't you see so much empathy in the way he treats people?
100%. The way that he engages with people in a way, the word compassion comes to my mind.
So much compassion.
Yeah, and not many people know the actual definition of compassion. Passion being actually to suffer. Passio is to suffer, and to have compassion is to suffer alongside or just suffer with. And so, this is why we'll talk about like The Passion of the Christ was a movie. I don't know if you remember.
Oh,
the
I
movie.
saw that. Yeah,
I remember that one.
It was a hard one. Yeah.
Yeah, hard to watch because
was.
of the level of suffering that is conveyed. We talk about Holy Week usually where Jesus' death and resurrection is the passion narrative or the passion of Christ. And it's all like suffering and pain and hurt, and yet compassion is to suffer with, to suffer alongside. And that I see Jesus a lot of compassion that he suffers with us, alongside of us.
So much.
Because he's so incarnate. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jesus came, and when I study Matthew, I see that he's preaching, teaching, and healing.
Yeah.
That was his work that he came to do. So I really identify with that healing side of Jesus. Yeah, so many people came to him for physical healing.
Yes.
But he knew
so much more.
But he gave them that.
Yep.
Then he's like, I'm going to give you way more than you bargained for. You don't know. You didn't know. Like, these people didn't know that what they truly needed was holistic healing.
Yes.
And I think each one that met with him left understanding the extent of what they'd been given. It wasn't only physical, it was emotional and spiritual as well.
Yeah, when you see him engaging with people in the scriptures, you're right. It's not like he's not doing just simple trope magic where people just walk up and he just does like, bzz, you're healed.
Right.
Next, it's not the way it works. He engages with people that addresses the full person. I'm thinking of like when he, heals a leper, he touches them. He doesn't, from a distance, he doesn't he's just like, hey, okay, you're healed. Right. Like he's willing to, draw close and touch the untouchable.
Right.
And there's more than just simple physical reaction in what's happening there. There's a mental, emotional, spiritual connection that's being made as well as physical. He's addressing the whole person.
He is.
Someone who's been cast out, ostracized, left alone. I mean, they're dealing with more than just their body falling apart. They're dealing with their
Oh,
character and identity and their
right.
spirit falling apart.
He's giving them a place of belonging and love.
Connection.
And that's what every human needs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I love that. Like, I'm going to write that book someday.
You got to.
The healing ministry of Jesus, and like that is so much of what our calling is. So then how we interact with people can either be healing. They can leave our time together healed, or they can leave hurt, right? Or just nothing. It can be neutral. But as a believer, sometimes our focus is on right theology and right action to the point where we ostracize people, we judge them, we tell them they're out. You can't be in with me because you don't believe that, or you aren't acting the right way, or you don't have the right clothes on. I can't let you into my perfect little world. So the church should be a hospital.
Oh, I love it. You're drawing on one of the most famous analogies from the scriptures that we get, which is, that the church is a hospital and Christ is the good doctor. And we are in need of healing. We are all broken and messy, and the idea being that somehow we have to have it together and be healed before we meet Jesus is an absolute inverse of what we see in the scriptures.
It's not at all. The people he chose in ministry, the people he healed, every one of us is a mess without him, and he brings wholeness and healing to the situation.
Yes. I so appreciate, and this obviously ushers into a sense of how we approach mental health and well-being, that when we neglect a certain area of our life, we don't see that with Jesus. He didn't neglect aspects of people or their life. He came to them when they were messy, when they were broken, and offered healing, whether it be physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, all of those pieces. So when are you going to write this book?
Have little pieces. A few years ago, I wrote a few things down, but
Excellent.
I mean, I think that's the call on my life.
Yes.
I'm not always good at it. I mean, I'm super impatient. Just ask my kids. I'm very impatient. And I say judgmental things, and I have a lot of things to work on. But I know that I came out of a lot of brokenness in my own childhood and suffered a lot of pain, and I want to bring justice into space where there's injustice, and I want to bring a sense of acceptance for people who don't feel accepted. I want to break down hierarchies where there are many, male, female, racial, other things.
Can we pull on this thread? I want to pull on this thread.
Go
This
ahead.
is so good. This is so good. Because I think what you're going to is the question of how, as a Christian person, we have a sense of responsibility. What is our call? What is our role? For those of us who ascribe to the Christian tradition, how do we respond to the brokenness and the sickness of this world? And how do we respond to, specifically even the people around us who need that healing? I'm thinking of people who are suffering, and this is a great place to explore with you because of your backdrop and your knowledge base and your own experiences. How do we help people as Christians who are struggling with mental illness, mental health situations, stigmas? What is our calling? What is our role? And what insight do you have from your experience? How does a Christian respond in today's world to someone struggling in their mental health?
Well, I think a lot of it is our words. Our words matter. And the way we talk to our brothers and sisters and about them, whether we're with them or not. So stigma means shame. There's a lot of shame and stigma around mental health. So if somebody has cancer, I think it's not that hard to call in and get yourself on the prayer list.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because
we treat that physiologically.
we all know that's terrible.
Right.
And nobody wants that or deserves that. But what about generalized anxiety disorder and you can barely leave your house? What about severe depression and you can't get out of bed? That's shameful. Most people don't look at that and think, oh, I don't know, good for you. I don't know, I'm going to pray for you. I don't know, we just, for some reason, the mental side, maybe because we can't see it, it's intangible, or we have some false beliefs about what it means to be a Christian. We think that we can pray away or think away our mental unwellness. And I don't believe that's true. A lot of times people would look at mental unwellness and think it's a spiritual symptom, but it's a biological symptom. It's a symptom of genetic issues. People whose parents are more depressed or anxious, that gets passed down. It's what about people who are living very low on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So if you haven't taken a developmental psych class, there's this triangle that I refer to all the time. On the bottom is safety.
Yeah.
Physical safety, a home, a shelter, food.
Right.
There are people that don't have any of that or very little of that, or it's not stable. So there's the idea that if you don't have those basic human needs, you can't go farther up the triangle, and at the top of the triangle, self-actualization. That's, I'm living into my fullest human potential. And if I don't have, if we have brothers and sisters who are struggling with basic needs, it's going to be very hard to be the fullness of your mental health. So it's easy to judge, but are we helping give basic needs? Are we meeting food, shelter, those needs? And then people, once those are met, they can move up and into their own mental and spiritual growth at times. So I read I'm going to botch this, but I read some books in grad school about how communities in poverty, how we all know that the crime rate is higher when people are in poverty. But once you start providing basic human rights, that goes down. So I think, stigma's got to go. Our platitudes have to go. We put platitudes everywhere as Christians. We put them on our book titles, we put them on our church signs, we put them on our cards, and then we say them. But people, that won't help anybody. That's not therapeutic for anyone.
There's so many things you just said that I so deeply resonate. Everything from even to just your last comment, the platitudes. Here at Christ Church, one of the things that we regularly try to do is debunk bad theology, because we're convinced that bad theology hurts people badly. And so when you say those tropes and those platitudes, it often comes from a well-meaning heart or place,
right?
And yet it ends up being less helpful and even destructive at times. And so I think there's a call of responsibility to be attentive to these types of conversations. This is why we have to have the sacred space to talk about meaningful things that are real, that are actualized, and that we take them with the utmost attentiveness and care. I so also resonate with how quickly we try to, because the world is so overwhelming and our lives are complex, we often, I think, seek out simplicity, which there's beauty in simplicity, and yet because of that, if we go too far, we can err on the side of simplicity at the cost of recognizing the complexity. And what I'm hearing from you is, people are complex.
We are.
Their situations are complex.
Yeah.
You can't just look at somebody who is struggling in a certain way, throw out a simple platitude, pull yourself up by the bootstraps,
right,
and assume that that's enough to quote unquote fix it. There is a complexity that we are called to attend to in the same way that we are complex creatures. We have to recognize the complexity in others and a willingness to meet them in their complexity. And it doesn't chagrin responsibility or appropriate behaviors and things like that. Of course, all good responsibilities, yes. But how we respond to our brother or sister, like for example, who's not even getting basic needs met, we go and we give them bread, we give them food,
right,
we give them water. I'm thinking where Jesus he fed the 5,000. He's like, boy, there's a lot of hungry people here. They're probably not going to pay attention to much more I got to say because they're hungry.
Right, he knew.
He knew.
That's what they need first. So maybe the simplest thing that anybody could do is be an active listener.
Ooh.
So
yeah, okay, say more.
Most of us, we want and need to talk about our problems and our situations to other people. If we're all doing that, then no one's listening. So a gift that we can give one another is active listening, where we don't think of the next thing we're going to say. We're not adding exactly the same situation that we had 5 years ago that's just like yours. We're listening to every word you're saying. We're looking you in the eye. and we're feeding back what we hear. So I hear what you're saying is you feel really worried about that, or that sounds really overwhelming, tell me more. So that therapeutic communication, it's free. We can do that on a Sunday morning, we can do that on a Wednesday night, we can do that in a text and a phone call. How can I listen to understand and to hear what someone's trying to say instead of interjecting my words?
Oh, that's so good. That's such a simple skill practice that so many people look past. You know, the Bible teaches us to be, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry, slow to let your mouth run. And instead, if I'm hearing you correctly, words matter, and we should go out of our way to listen to the words that people are giving us, sharing with us, and to honor them. Not try to fix stuff necessarily, not to make quick judgment statements, but just to reflect back to them. So can you give us again those concrete examples, because I think those are really, a lot of people just don't even have the skills or the tools. So what are some intro language pieces that you would recommend for a Christian who wants to get better at listening?
Well, one phrase that I teach my students that's never wrong is I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're going through that. I'm sorry that sounds like that's hurting you. So listening to the pain that somebody has, if you hear pain, you can say, I'm sorry. That doesn't sound easy. And then as someone's speaking, something that you can say, you can mirror the words that you're hearing. So what I hear you saying is, you feel anxious about that test. What I hear you saying is, that's very painful for you. I'm sorry about that. And then what you said, you don't have to fix it. That's the beauty of active listening, is you don't have to come up with a solution. That is the solution, because we all need to be heard and understood. And so offering active listening to someone is a way of giving them a therapy. It's giving them a sense of safety and belonging. And we can do that. I mean, I think the church is uniquely positioned to do that. If we would, right? If we would,
let's do it, right?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we can be a place who listens really well to one another, and then refrain from judgment. You do not have to, as a listener, make a judgment about what you're hearing. You can just hear it. You can remain curious. You don't have to. I remember when I was younger, I always thought that giving a really strong opinion was the right thing to do. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought that's what made me a strong person, is like have strong opinions about everything. And as I've grown in my Christianity, it's kind of become the opposite. Have less strong opinions. Be more curious. Listen better. You don't have to tell everyone exactly what you think about everything. Just be a sounding board. And I have to work very hard at it sometimes. When I'm at work, I'm pretty good at it. In my personal life, I'm very task focused.
Ooh, that's good. You're right. Sometimes there's a delineation there for some of us where we navigate the world like in a professional setting in one way, but then we come home and sometimes it's our relationships that are closest to us that we forget these skills. So active listening, reflective listening, not making judgmental statements. I so appreciate that, in so much as this is part of, I think, what mature Christianity that we're called to exhibit. So for those of us who are just embarking on the journey, this is the trajectory that Jesus sets us on, is to listen, to empathize, to be with people. We sometimes refer to a ministry of presence. That's something that our trained care ministers and A.B. Maberman, our care director, is so good at reminding us consistently of, is, sometimes the best way to love people is to love them with your person being present, and not necessarily fixing things or doing things. Just sometimes as a pastor I get the question is like, well, did you really love them if you didn't lay down the law or you didn't really do something about it? And my reflection on that is that if I hear those comments, the person has not yet understood the significance and the role of active listening, of a ministry of presence, of the nuance even of relationship, because I think active listening provides space then for trust to be built.
Right.
and for relationship to grow, where you can begin to speak into their lives
Right.
when they're willing and ready.
And that's such a principle of personal change. People will not change until they are ready.
Yes.
And so we also use a technique called motivational interviewing,
Ooh.
where we help people explore, like say someone wants to quit smoking. It doesn't work to tell somebody again, smoking's bad for your health. They already know that.
Right,
That's a
right.
very common knowledge piece in our culture today. Not, when some people began smoking in the 1930s and 40s, but now everyone knows, that's unhealthy. So to just tell people you need to quit, it doesn't work.
Not effective.
Behavior change, internal change, has to come at the time that someone's ready to do it, and they have to figure out their reasons why they want to and need to. So like with addiction is really hard too, because even if they might want to change, there's biological components to it. But anything, I think it's freeing to understand that we don't have to change people, but people need other people when they do want to change.
Well said.
So to come alongside and
Yes.
keep someone accountable, it can be part of our work.
Yes.
When someone wants us to, when they're ready to change.
That's really well said, that coming alongside someone is not making a judgment in any direction, both of condemnation nor affirmation. It is not affirming someone's behavior, nor is it condemning it, but is just simply being present and available. And as the relationship progresses, as trust is built, as space is given, then you are always attentive and available when the time is right to be there when they need help in a new way. And they're asking and seeking for it.
Right.
And then we respond accordingly. Yes, let's get you help. Let's do this. We can do this. You can do this. Let's pray about this.
Yeah. I almost heard you just saying, another thing that I think about is that we can give hope. Like we can give hope. There's
Yes.
always hope
Yes.
in Jesus.
Oh my goodness.
There's always hope. Even though some people will probably, in different seasons, struggle on and off with mental health or mental wellness throughout their lives, just because of how they're wired, because of the different stressors they have.
Yep.
Some people have way more stressors in their lives. And mental illness kicks in when the stressors overtake the barriers.
Ooh, okay. Can you say more about that? Tell me more about that.
Okay.
Say what you just said. It's so good.
So mental illness kicks in when the stressors of life overtake the barriers and the capacity that we have to withstand those stressors. So that's why it can be seasonal for some people. There can be
Yes.
times in your life where you are experiencing forms of mental illness and times where you're fine. So stressors can be biological, they can be environmental, they can be a trauma, they can be a variety of
Yes,
things. And if we don't have the internal capacity to fight back against those stressors, then that's when mental illness can kick in. So, so you can live with anxiety, you can have anxious tendencies, but if you have tools to deal with it, then you might not live with mental illness or in a state of mental unwellness. You might just have some anxiety, but you have tools to deal with it.
Right. Your mental health will be in a better place than if you didn't have those tools because you're
Right.
exercising. So,
But mental illness is when the stressors are just too much for your capacity. And so then you also go into a space where you can't do your activities of daily living.
Yes.
You something in your life will suffer. Your
Yes.
schoolwork, your sleep,
yes.
your relationships, some area of your life will suffer. So that's how we know that you're struggling with mental illness, or that's kind of the way it happens.
It's a really good way to help people understand the delineation that everybody has mental health. Everybody has to be attentive to their mental health. Everybody has a responsibility and a stewardship related to their mental health and well-being. And as we operate on that spectrum of healthiness and unwellness, there's a
Right.
tipping point where all of a sudden you are unable to accomplish or perform basic tasks and life-giving
Right.
experiences that we, when you are more healthy, take for granted sometimes,
Yeah.
or just operate with as normal,
Yeah.
if you will. And so that becomes the delineation point, is when you are depreciating certain aspects of your life. You're just unable.
And it could be biological too. So think of like a
Yes.
mother and a postpartum mother. A lot of women
Great example.
suffer from postpartum depression.
Yes.
So there's neurotransmitters, there's changes in hormones at that time. After you have a baby, your whole body chemistry is in an upheaval.
Yes.
So even if you think of yourself as very put together and you have plans and you have meal delivery, it's not your fault if your biology overtakes your capacity, your biological capacity.
Yes.
You might be a victim of postpartum depression or beyond.
Absolutely.
That's why these seemingly normal women, mothers, all of a sudden, you've seen terrible stories in the news because
Yes.
they have succumbed to this biological upheaval that they couldn't handle on their own.
So they're biological, right? Knowing the complexity again of like our biological factors, environmental
Right.
factors, and we can't control all the different factors
No.
out there. So, okay, can you list for me again some of that paradigm? So there are biological factors and biological things, environmental factors.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more, like what's examples of environmental factors and stressors and things?
So like a trauma, like a car accident,
Yep.
the death of a loved one.
Yep. Fair to say things at work, let's say a
Yes,
workload.
just stress in general. So
General
like I
stress,
had a student
environmental.
drop out this semester due to mental health. Her ability to handle all of the demands of the schoolwork, she just couldn't do it anymore. She was feeling very anxious and depressed, and she went home.
Yeah.
And I commended her for that because she realized that all the things coming at her, it was just too much.
Good. Yep.
So besides environment, then there's genetic factors too.
Genetic.
So then there's like factors of what helps you combat the stressors too.
Yes.
So different personalities are more prone to anxiety than others, for instance. I noticed that with my, in my own children and family that do you know the Myers-Briggs?
I do.
So the N's,
Yep.
the N's can't fall asleep because they have so much going on in their head. They're ruminators.
Yes.
They think about things. I'm an S. I shut my eyes, I go right to sleep.
I'm so jealous. I'm an N. I'm an N.
I would have guessed you were an N.
Absolutely.
So like just your personality makeup.
Absolutely. Even things like that, right?
Yeah.
Your personality and the way that you operate, the way that
Yeah.
you're wired,
Right.
can sometimes lead you to be predisposed
Right.
to certain things.
The way you've been parented, your sense of resilience, if you've gone through hard things and come out stronger. If you had hard things in childhood and you had someone there with you at the time versus if you didn't. So it's so complex.
Yeah. All of these factors contribute to a person's makeup and who they are. And so when we think about mental health and mental unwellness, any one of those factors can help us understand a triggering moment.
Right.
Like you said, biologically, a postpartum mom, their bodies are in such flux that could be a catalyst alone. And then you think about multiple factors happening at the same time in a certain person. If they're genetically predisposed, they have biological, tendency. Let's say they have some historical factors from
Right.
growing up. You start compounding these things. Then it makes even that much more sense why there's such a mass epidemic related to mental unwellness.
20% of adults at all times in the U.S.
20% of all
One in
adults.
5 people.
1 in 5 people are
So
struggling with
a
mental
lot
health
of people in our congregation are suffering. A lot of people at any given time.
at any given time, which is why we must be attentive to it as a church, as Christian people. It matters.
It does matter.
This is part of who God made us as. Let me put my little theological lens on here, and I can't help but acknowledge. You began at the very beginning by talking about like we can see physical brokenness often. Like if I break a bone, I'm reminded of our frailty when I get sick with the flu, when I've got a broken bone, or when we have a significant diagnosis related to like cancer
Right.
or a chronic illness of some kind. The same is true in regards to our mental and emotional well-being, that we are also susceptible to brokenness in every aspect of our life. And to think that somehow that our emotions or our minds are sin-proof, are
Right.
brokenness-proof, is just a fallacy.
It is.
And so part of, I think, maturing in our Christian thought is recognizing brokenness extends even into our mental and emotional states.
Beautiful.
And we need to be attentive to that. That's part of our calling. That's why we're talking about these things as Christians in today's world. And I appreciate that there is, I think, a movement within culture. I'd be curious to your thoughts, that there seems to be a more awareness. There seems to be like a growing, when 1 in 5 adults is struggling with this reality, it seems to be bubbling to the surface of more conversations culturally.
I think it is. I think the generation of students right now that I have, they're talking about it more than anyone ever has. They are trying to de-stigmatize mental illness.
De-stigmatizing it.
Yep. Trying to take the shame out of it, be vulnerable with one another, and say, hey, I have ADHD. I need special help when I take my test. And no one says anything about it. It's fine. You need time and a half? Great. We'll give you time and a half. That's fine. But I think maybe some of the older generations weren't given the space to talk about it, to be honest with themselves.
Well said.
I mean, people came back from World War I and II, and what did they call it? They had some special name for shell shock. It was shell shock. Shell shock. They went through the trauma of war, and they called it shell shock, but they didn't do anything about it. But now, like, the military is starting to take it seriously with veterans.
Yes. Another mass epidemic is the reality of how veterans are coming home from these experiences. And I'm talking about such sacrifice, and yet having to deal on the backside with the reality of what that means. Yes, and it's finally coming to a place where we're more comfortable as a culture and society talking about some of this stuff.
So yeah, I think secularly we are. I think so. The military is looking at it. Healthcare is looking at it.
Yes.
The church, I think, is a little behind.
We're lagging.
We're a little slow, and
I agree.
I think it's because we equate our mental health with our spiritual health. So, like, if I'm spiritually healthy, I'm not going to be suffering mentally and emotionally.
Excellent. Oh.
Because if I love Jesus, I'm not going to be sad.
I'm never going to have a problem.
No. Yep.
You hear me say it all the time from the platform. Like, there's this. I don't know where it comes from. To be honest, I think you're right though that there is this idea that you become a Christian, and it goes to that hope and the delineation, the differential between hope and happiness. And that when you become a Christian, you have hope. That doesn't mean life's going to be happy all the time. Doesn't mean you start riding unicorns, farting butterflies and sneezing out rainbows.
I hope not.
No, that's not how this works.
No.
It's the reality of you can have hope and you still continue to exist within a broken world. You are saved and redeemed and claimed in Christ, and yet you are still, I'll speak for myself, I am most certainly aware of my frailties and brokenness constantly. At the same time, I am a saint and a sinner, part of this world, and yet I have hope in a world yet to come.
Right.
And that somehow has not necessarily translated well into all Christian conversations. And I appreciate when you're right. I think the church is a little lagging in acknowledging some of these things, because you're right. We depend on the tropes. Just pray it away, or you'll be fine, or or we just say it isn't real altogether for some
Right. I mean, there are Christians that don't think you should use medication for mental health.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I think as Christians, we just, if we're doing it right, we are just like any other human, except that we know we're broken. We're aware of it.
There's awareness.
And we're dependent on the Spirit.
Ooh,
and we have the Spirit within us.
Yes.
So we have an additional voice in our lives, this wisdom, but that doesn't mean our bodies and minds still don't succumb to the difficulties of this world.
Yes.
Right?
So they're susceptible as much as everything else.
Yeah.
Our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. I think of the Psalms regularly. Big fan. And I think particularly of the Psalms when I think of mental health and spiritual health and physical health, but particularly mental health and spiritual health, because there are moments where I think you can read the Psalms and you can see the depth of someone's pain and suffering.
Oh, yeah.
So evident, so prominent, as somebody is crying out, and you can feel their spirit. But their brain and their mind is working okay. Their body is working okay. But he even, the psalmist will write, like, why are you so downcast, O my soul, my spirit? Why, right? You can feel the spirit wrestling within them. Then you'll read another psalm, and you'll feel some of their mental emotional wrestling, where you can see the back and forth of their mind as their health in regards to their mind and emotions is not well. And it's just such a beautiful way of
It's a
showing
realistic
that.
picture of human.
Yeah.
Don't you think some of David's songs that he wrote would have been in a minor key? Like,
Oh, right? Yes. Absolutely.
he's out there on his harp. Those are not all major keys, those songs.
Right?
A little melancholy.
Melancholy.
We are, like human beings, like we have ups, we have downs,
Yes.
we have good times, we have hard seasons, and I think that's just the reality that we have to accept in each other.
Correct.
Sometimes we make good decisions, sometimes we don't.
Yes.
Sometimes we're susceptible to things, and we just have to be open to that in the church. Like, we're just human beings, humans, not little Jesuses. We're trying to follow Jesus, but we're not Jesus.
That's exactly right. Allowing ourselves the space to acknowledge, again, that self-awareness, right? Allowing ourselves to acknowledge who we are and where we're at. And rejoicing, ironically, that I'm not Jesus, and still he loves me, and
Right.
he cares about me, and he forgives me, and I'm going to give it my all, knowing I'm never even going to reach it there. Thanks be to God, I don't need to, because he's done it for me. Wow, this is such a rich conversation. They're so good.
How are we doing on time?
We're doing great. We're
Because
rocking and rolling.
like the other thing though,
Please, what else do you have on
so
your mind?
Jesus was so empathetic to people in their physical and emotional issues.
Yes.
But he also was perfect at putting up boundaries, and I don't know how he did it.
Good, yes.
So
Oh, please say more to
So
that.
boundaries. So I was talking to a friend the other night about some emotionally immature in-laws that she has.
Okay.
There's a mother-in-law that it's really all about her. Like she wants a lot of this person's schedule. She's unwilling to negotiate. She's holding gifts and monetary things over this couple's head.
Okay.
So it's pretty relationally difficult.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to my friend about how she's going to have to look at some boundaries.
Absolutely.
And so she was struggling with that. She's like, I want to be kind, I want to be nice. And she's a Christian. And I was
Yes.
like, just because we're Christian does not mean that we don't also have to at times put up boundaries.
Yes.
So this belongs in the mental health conversation as well.
Does.
Because, say you have a child who's drug addicted, they've been in programs, you've helped them, you're there for them, you love them still, and they try to steal your money and they are using you, you're gonna have to put a boundary. Like,
Yes.
we have to know how to do that in a loving, godly way, but saying no to some things is still, Jesus did it.
Mm-hmm.
He put up boundaries on his time. When he needed time, he went
Yes.
alone.
He retreated.
He did. He would tell people no.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, some of that's self-protective of our own mental health, right? So
Right.
like, I can't, as a pastor, you can't meet everyone's needs 24/7. You cannot.
Can't do
or
it.
you will be mentally unwell.
Well said.
So how do you, you're gonna have to find boundaries where it's
Correct.
just you and your family. And I think, each one of us, we can't help and do everything for everyone. So, and if people are hurting us intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes we're gonna have to say, I can't have you in my life right now.
Yes.
Or I'll talk to you when you're willing to talk to me like a person. I can't be in this relationship, you're abusive. A different thing, like you get to put up boundaries as a believer, because Jesus did it.
I so appreciate this, because this is a part of the conversation that sometimes is often misconstrued, I think, is, when we engage with someone who is mentally, emotionally unwell, oftentimes hurting people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not careful, Christians, I think, can fall into this false dichotomy of saying, well, I have to just love them.
Mm-hmm.
I have to just love them. I just got to love them. And what people don't realize is that setting up appropriate boundaries is, in fact, loving someone
Right.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we don't set boundaries on that person, we can actually feed into things like dependency, and we can destroy character, and we
Right.
can destroy and create bad habits that are self-destructive for that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so boundaries are not only good for ourselves and our own stewardship of our own mental and emotional well-being, but also they are a loving act for the individual
Mm-hmm.
as we try to love them.
That's right.
And so setting up time boundaries, you know, conversation boundaries. You can't talk to me like that, so I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
setting up boundaries in regards to accessibility. You know, we carry our phones with us all the time, but it doesn't mean you have to answer them all the time.
Right.
You know, setting up expectations and norms too, or boundaries around, hey, you know, if you're going to live in my home, these are the expectations
Yeah.
of what it means to live here.
Yeah.
And following through with boundaries.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah.
It's so hard,
Yeah.
particularly when you have someone that you love who is struggling with mental health.
That is true.
What advice would you give to somebody who is loving someone with mental health struggles? What advice would you give a parent, a friend, a brother, a sister, a daughter, a son? Any advice or insight regarding to having and maintaining boundaries with someone who is struggling with their mental
Oh gosh,
health?
that's so hard.
Yeah, that's a tough one, I know. Trust me.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
it's so hard because a lot of mental illness, especially I'm thinking about addictions, can go on for years,
Yes.
years, and really affect the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, obviously the first thing you'd want to do is make sure they have the help they need.
Good.
Do they have professional resources?
Yes,
If you're a family member, you are not going to be able to combat addiction on your own.
Don't try to treat, don't try to fix, don't try to, yes.
You can't do that alone.
Don't be someone other than who you are. Allow a professional come alongside
Right.
you. Don't do this alone in terms
can't
of
do that
helping
alone.
that person.
Right. So make sure they get the help they need.
Let them, help them get connected to the person they need.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I guess it would depend on over time how it was. Like if that person is not able to follow through the boundaries you set up about, say, like living in your home, or you know, safety is first. Like if you are unsafe in that person's presence, you're going to have to prioritize your safety. We say that in nursing. Like we love our like we care for our patients.
Yes.
We do everything. But if our safety is compromised, that comes first, because then we can't help them. You know, just like the flight attendants on the plane.
Yeah.
You know,
The-
put
the
your
mask,
oxygen on
get your
first.
mask on first.
Yeah, so
Yes.
if there's a safety issue, you might, sometimes you have to call the police. Sometimes you have to
Yes.
turn your own kid in for something. Like it's painful and it's ugly, but boundaries will be important, because otherwise you will be sucked into that as well.
I think I so appreciate your willingness to say the hard thing. I thank you for having the courage to say the difficult thing, that sometimes following through on the boundaries is not fun, it is not comfortable, it is not easy, and yet it is still the right, good thing to do for you and for the person you're trying to love. And so it can mean doing some very hard and difficult things. Oftentimes, I find that persons who are striving to love somebody who is struggling with their mental health, you know, they need to be attentive in asking themselves too, am I getting resourced? Am I
Right.
being supported as I love this person?
They often will need a support group or someone to come alongside of them, because that is such emotional work.
Because they, in the same way, they are going to be dealing with their own mental emotional struggles and the pain that comes from the relationship. And so if you have somebody who's struggling, who's mentally unwell, the person who is trying to love them, the family member or friend who's trying to love them, needs to be sensitive and attentive to their boundaries and to their mental health as well. That's the oxygen mask. Put your oxygen mask on first, so that they can continue to love that other person well.
Right.
And you're right, sometimes it means doing some very hard things. Sometimes it means putting people in positions where they have to get help where they don't want it. Sometimes it means, you know, putting them in positions, like you said, safety is so very important. Their safety, your safety. And so it means uncompromising on some boundaries. There's a reason why boundaries exist.
Yeah.
And they're vital.
And we talked about how people don't change until they're ready. And sometimes being told that you can't come back in this house until you quit your whatever is the motivation that someone needs to finally realize, I'm at the bottom. I don't want to live like this anymore. I will change.
I will change.
But if we continue to enable, sometimes people won't change.
Yes.
It's hard though. I can't imagine, you know, like my kids are younger. I can't imagine the pain that would be, like, say if you had a kid that had addiction, or you just saw they were ending up in jail, or just had really, really difficult circumstances. Like, you would want to help them. That would be your first response. Like, you would want to. But over time, you can't keep bailing them out. You know, once you have adult children,
Yes.
or a brother, like you can't keep sending him money. You know, like
Correct.
it's very challenging because when we love people, sometimes we allow things to happen that we shouldn't, boundary-wise.
You know, I think this is also another time to affirm the importance of professionals. Professionals such as yourself, and professionals who are familiar with the field and the area, and the importance of saying, like, if I don't know, am I enabling my son, my daughter, my mom, my dad, my brother, my friend, whoever it is, my sister? You know, this is part of the reason why there are persons such as yourself who have such familiarity that can help cast things in a different light, who can ask the right and appropriate questions, who can help someone, not only help an individual struggling with their mental health, but help us be equipped to love them well. So thank you for what you do in the field, in the area of nursing, in medical, in science, in all these aspects, because what you're doing is you're equipping the Christian body to love well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think it just bears naming. If people are struggling to discern, is this a right move? There are brothers and sisters in faith that we can connect with to say and to run this by. It means being vulnerable. It means being done in the right and appropriate environments with the right and appropriate people. You don't just go ask anybody.
Right.
You want to go to people who have a thoughtfulness, an experience, and a maturity in this area and a field. And you can say, hey, this is my situation. What advice? Am I enabling right now? What boundaries should I stick to? What boundaries, is this an unhealthy boundary? You know, is this a boundary that's not even feasible?
Yeah.
What advice would you give? And I just so appreciate professionals and individuals like yourself who can help us navigate through such situations. Thanks for what you do.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the church body, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's the beauty of a huge family in Christ,
Yes.
is that you have all of these people who are also seeking the wisdom of the Lord.
Yes.
People are in different places in their walks,
Yes.
have different expertise, and
Yes.
they should be accessible. Like, people in your church should be some of the people that you go to help you navigate not only spiritual issues, but mental and emotional ones as well, like relational issues. Like,
Yes.
what do you think? How can I think about this differently? Yeah.
Again, that takes a level of maturity, and part of one of this conversation is so rich and so good is because it's causing, hopefully, people to pause and do some self-reflection, right? I mean, you talked about the top of the hierarchy of needs in terms of like self-awareness and the ability to ask oneself, how am I doing in relating to my own mental health, and how am I doing relating to other people's mental health and well-being? And that is a very demanding, mature thing to think through. And so thank you for creating space for us. Like you said, in the church body, churches are lagging on this, and we need to be at the forefront. We should be shining here. This is our jam, right? To think about Jesus as the great doctor, and the church as a hospital. I even appreciate, I think one of the things you make me think of is how we look at one another in the church. That when we look at the people beside us, we don't look with the expectation that they have it all together. We should be expecting people to struggle.
Yeah.
We should be expecting the brothers and sisters who are beside us to be hurting, to need us, our prayers, our love. You know, they might be somebody sitting there who can't sing that morning because they are so caught in the pit and depths of depression that they can't even pray the Lord's Prayer. You got to be their voice for them. You got to speak it for them. You know, we have people who are going to be walking through our doors who've never even been at a church, and it's their last-ditch effort because they're struggling with addictions, because their relationships have all fallen apart, because all of their extended family struggle with mental health.
Yeah.
And so I thank you for calling attention to the church being a hospital, because I just so resonate with that, particularly a church for those who aren't here yet. Because there's a lot of broken, messy people out there that need Jesus.
Amen.
You know? So, yeah, this is just so good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So often we put ourselves in a myopic manner where we think in terms of extremes. And we do this in all areas of our lives. We do this regularly, again, to simplify things. And we think of specifically mental health as being kind of the two extremes. Like, I'm totally good, I'm all fine and well.
Right.
Or I can't get out of bed. I can't do a single thing, right? And there's a large spectrum in between that. And we talked earlier about like a tipping point where we go into like a diagnosis point.
Right.
But again, there's a real...
There's a continuum.
Continuum.
Yeah.
Continuum.
This line.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people suffering throughout that line.
At different points throughout the
different
entirety
points.
of it.
Right, where people don't understand what's wrong, why they feel the way they do, and maybe they don't understand it's mental, emotional. And that they don't, like, Jesus wants wholeness for us, I believe. And so there's seasons and times where we feel we can get out of bed, we can cook the meal, we can go through the motions, but we're not living into the fullness of what we could be living into. And so maybe that's the time where we also need help. We also need people to talk to, and self-awareness and empathy.
Yes.
Like I'm not living into the fullness of Christ. I'm going through the motions. And I'm not taking an SSRI, but I'm really sad a lot.
Right.
Or I'm really anxious a lot. And I need something too. What would you say to those people in the congregation?
Yeah, so the challenge of not to a point where, for example, you need to be seeing someone on a regular and ongoing basis, or you need to be professionally medicated or things like that. But to still acknowledge, I think you said earlier, like our stressors can sometimes tip over and there's like a tipping point. I want to acknowledge the tipping point, but you also don't want to be living bumping kind of
Right,
like
up against that.
up against it all the time.
Right.
Like you got it under wraps, like you can handle it. But I love when you're describing like the fullness of the Christian life, and we don't ever want to shortchange. We always want to be striving for the true fullness of what Christ has called us to. Even knowing we'll never reach it this side of life, it doesn't mean that we are still not beckoned towards it and called towards it.
And to heal, like I think Jesus is always calling us to be, more healing. I will heal you emotionally.
Yes.
And so maybe a lot of people who are struggling in that day-to-day, not mental illness, but mental unwellness,
Yes.
or on the verge of mental illness, there's probably a lot of suffering or past hurt that needs to be dealt with, or there's a relationship that's pretty toxic in their lives, or there's something where they need additional wisdom or help or support. And I think those people need to reach out as well. And sometimes it's hard to do that though, because you think, I'm going to save the resources for the people who really need it.
Yes. Yes, right? I so appreciate the challenge that some people face in terms of, I'm well enough. And if we're not careful, we can settle for something less than the full Christian life and the fullness of what God intends for us. And so I think there's a place for us to acknowledge and name for those who feel well enough that, man, don't also sell yourself short. Your mental, emotional well-being, still give space for it. Engage in the healthy practices. Engage in, things like exercise, meditation,
Rest.
Bible reading, rest. Right? Like exactly.
Community. If you're not
Community.
talking to a friend in a month, that's a
that's
setup for something to go wrong.
Be attentive to, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
If you don't have time.
The skills you were talking about before too, about like validation and active listening and things like that we should be practicing those things all the time, whether or not we feel we need it, so that it's always there and always moving us towards that full wellness.
There's this concept in trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
It's basically universalizing all the things we would do with somebody who's been through a big trauma, which is giving them choice, active listening, partnering with them. And if we could treat everyone in the church like they've had suffering in their lives, like they might have suffering now, like maybe their mental health isn't 100%. If we could treat everyone with that empathy and care and listening, I think we'd all be in a better place.
Yes. That if we approach one another with a disposition that says, regardless of where they sit on the continuum, they're on the continuum.
Yeah.
And that we can do something to love, appreciate, listen, and come alongside them in a way that helps encourage and move our brothers and sisters, help walk with them towards the fullness of what God desires for them as well.
Absolutely.
It makes me think, one last comment I would say is the importance, for example, of, like I mentioned, exercise. And I think so often people have this idea of, you go to the gym and you go, only fit people go to the gym.
Yeah.
Right? And the irony is that, no, you go to the gym in order to get fit. And then you go to the gym, this idea that only fit people go to the gym is kind of a misnomer. You go to the gym in order to get fit and maintain your fitness. And you do that by continually having those disciplines of going to the gym and working out and being attentive to your physical health, the same is true for our mental and our spiritual health. That we need to begin, and we need to get in there, and we need to be dedicated to those practices, working those muscles, the spiritual muscles, the mental, emotional muscles that keep us as healthy as we can be. And so we don't ever let ourselves simply you don't see someone at the gym saying like, well, I'm healthy now, I'm fit. I'm fit, I'm good. And then it's like they walk away. Like, I don't need the gym anymore, I'm fit. No, what they do is they continue to maintain a dedication to those practices. And the same can be said, I think, in regards to our mental and emotional health.
Yeah, it's lifelong work.
It's lifelong work.
It is.
It's not like you ever
We've never arrived. None of us have ever arrived.
Precisely. We never hit a place where we're perfectly mentally healthy, perfectly good.
Right.
It's a never-ending discipline and practice that we pursue this side of life. And there's beauty in that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us for this valuable conversation about mental health and faith. Whether you're a health professional, a church leader, or you're someone who lives with mental health concerns or loves someone who does, we hope that this has been beneficial for you. We also encourage you to watch or listen to the other conversations in this limited series and find what else might be edifying for your practice, your church, and your lives.
We also know that this is ultimately an incomplete conversation, and so we invite you to continue the work of de-stigmatizing, to pursue your own healthiness, and to help create an authentic, faithful space in your life and the lives of others where we can talk about mental health. If you're a church leader or a mental health professional and wish to have a more robust conversation specifically with Christ Church and how we're choosing to navigate this conversation, we'd love to talk with you, share with what we've learned. If you're an individual interested in more, consider joining us for our mental health workshops and skills trainings led by mental health professionals. Also, you can see the Christian teachings connected to these videos by watching our Peace of Mind sermon series.
Thank you.